Well, welcome to the Sports Guys. This week we have a special episode for you. Really excited about it. This is a sport that I have loved since I was very young and we were living in Europe. We grew up overseas for most of our lives, and Rob and I came to love the sport of rugby. And so tonight we're going to talk about rugby. We're going to talk about the history of it, the rules of it, why it's so popular, why it's growing in popularity, kind of the future of the sport in the USA. And tonight we have a very special guest with us, Coach Nick Whitrow. How you doing, Nick?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining tonight. We really appreciate you being here. So Nick is head of Rugby XV, and he'll tell a little bit about that organization here in a minute. But he's had some real great experience both playing in England and then coming over to the U.S. and trying to help us Yanks try to learn the game and get better at it and figure out a way for Team USA to get competitive. So how you doing, Robbie?
Doing really well. Excited to be talking about rugby, which is one of my sports that I love, and a lot of people out there don't know a lot about it, of course, in the U.S. maybe. We do have a lot of international viewers, so it's kind of cool. They can hopefully weigh in and leave us some comments on how we did representing this sport. But yeah, real good. Very excited to be talking about rugby, that's for sure.
It's interesting you say that, Nick. I ran the statistics on this podcast for our first year, and 52% of our viewers have been international. So we do have a lot of international folks, but obviously we're also trying to capture the USA rugby fans or those who are curious about rugby. So Nick, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and playing over in England and coming over to the US and what you've done since?
Yeah. So originally, my dad played a lot of rugby when he was young, and just kind of grew up watching it and playing it, and had it in my high school. Played some club rugby before that, and at the junior club in Ormskirk, which is in Lancashire. That's my hometown. About 20 minutes outside of Liverpool, so more of a soccer area, but I grew up with my dad's love for the game. Played some competitive stuff for Waterloo Rugby Club. They were a pretty big team, big club in the early 2000s and prior to that. Sort of in 2004, I think it was, I decided that I wanted to, I just finished my bachelor's degree, and I wanted to travel a little bit. So came over here for just a 3-month rugby stint, played with Grand Rapids in Michigan, and enjoyed it. Came back for another little longer stint, came over on a J1 hospitality visa. So I was working in bars and restaurants. And like the first month of that 18-month visa, I met my now wife. So, and we actually met. She played college rugby. She played for Michigan State and Grand Valley up in Michigan, and we met on a sort of old girls alumni camping trip. I got roped into camping with a buddy of mine, and she was there, and now it's 15, 20 years later, and still over here, enjoying the growth of rugby over here. It's definitely more prevalent. There's more opportunities to coach professionally over in Europe because there's more of a professional league, but there's something about growing the game itself that just appeals to me. It's the US is such an untapped resource that it's really enjoyable to work in rugby over here and to help it grow. That's awesome. Did you ever get to see her play, your wife? I did. I saw her, and I actually coached her very, very briefly. I coached their sevens team. I was just helping out, but it was interesting.
So what position did she play, and what position did you play?
So I played scrum half, fly half. I've actually played across all the park. There's only a couple of positions that in the 30 years that I was playing that I didn't play. But she played scrum half and center. So, my knowledge base in the backline attack was kind of helpful for her. As a scrum half and a fly half, we are stereotypically not a fan of tackling and defending, and I think I fit that stereotype pretty well.
Do you think scrum half or fly half is a tougher position to play? What do you think?
It's different. I think again, it's like the quarterback position that's been split in two. So, I think if you have a good scrum half, then playing fly half is pretty easy. And if you have a good fly half, then playing scrum half is pretty easy. But yeah, I think both of them are a pretty technical position. You are essentially the coach on the field. There's no play calls coming from the side, so you're the one who's implementing the game plan, and so I think that's kind of what led me to go into coaching in the end, was because my love was for not just the physical side of the game, but the mental side of it as well. So,
what do you think is closest to the quarterback in the NFL? What position is it? The scrum half or the fly half? And which one's more like the running back?
I guess the scrum half would probably be closer to the quarterback, just because your range of passing has to be sort of multifaceted. But again, then you're looking at it's almost when you take the snap as a quarterback, you're a scrum half, but as you back out of the line of scrimmage and you drop into the pocket or whatever you call it in football, then you become more of a fly half. So the big difference for me and when I was switching, because I'd switch week to week depending on what the team needed. For scrum half play, it's very much what's in front of you, like what is immediately in front of you. And then for fly halves, it's a little bit more like what is behind that front line. So, it's kind of short-sighted and then long-sighted between the two. But yeah, it's definitely more technical positions, those two.
So which of you thinks misses playing more, you or your wife?
Oh, definitely me. She enjoyed it in college. It was a fun time for her, and we laughed because I've taken some serious college programs, and we've performed at at the D1 level, very high up, and she laughs because that's not why she started playing rugby. She played competitive soccer and was going to walk on at Grand Valley, or that was her intention. And she kind of came across rugby and decided that was going to be the one that she was going to play. So she laughs, and she's, if I was the coach at the time, she would have played for me because I take it too seriously. So, and again, there's a lot of stories that go back and forth in rugby in this country. There's two kind of, even at the college level, there's kind of two different sides of it. So you've got the high competitive, high performance programs, and then you do have like the club side of things. With your stereotypical, rugby college type.
Are you talking about like the big programs like UCLA, those kind of things, or?
Yeah, so they take it seriously, but again, there's like my wife played because she liked the social side of things, and there's a lot. There is a huge part of rugby that is about the social elements of rugby, the camaraderie. But there is also this school of thought that if we are to develop the sport and we are to develop it as a serious sport, then we do have to have a divide between the drinking team with the rugby problem, and then the actual high performance rugby programs that we see a lot of these days. So, what part of our crusade is to make sure that each side of that gets the feeding that it needs.
They take it seriously and that they become real athletes, is what you're saying. Yeah, it's funny, Rob. I was telling Nick off camera about our experience at University of Virginia. Of course, we lived in a fraternity house right on Rugby Road, right next to Mad Bowl, which is a big field that was intended for rugby, and men and women would play there. And I would sit there and watch our old friend from Paris, Chris Chiesla, who was on the UVA club team. And he would talk about, how it was about half rugby, half drinking beer. So exactly what you're talking about. And I always thought to myself, this was 34 years ago. I always thought to myself, when is the U.S. ever going to take this game seriously? And actually, turn out real athletes that could really compete. So. So yeah, I was talking a little bit about that, Robbie. So Robbie, tell us about your experience in rugby, how you got started on it, how you came to love the game, how you tried it.
I honestly don't even remember how I was asked to come try out. I remember I was playing soccer at the time, and I wanted to try something new. And so I went out and I really enjoyed it. I was kind of stunned at how fun it was. Um, it looked really rough, but when you're in it, it doesn't feel like that. It just feels like this fun adrenaline rush that I really enjoyed it a lot. I have a lot of great memories from it. I remember a couple of things stand out. I do remember the drinking side of it, the social side of it, and it was a really important side of it. We would pass a cleat around with beer in it and all that stuff. We were always seeking out the guy that really hit us hard all game long. We wanted to have a beer with him. There's a code kind of in that in the party atmosphere side of it where you don't hate the guy that was a total pain in your ass the whole game. You seek him out at the end. You want to know a little bit about him. He's kind of he's intriguing to you, so you want to have a beer with him. But as far as the game goes, it was fascinating to go from ground zero where I knew nothing to watching myself developing and my whole team around me developing and watching football players come out. They were amazingly talented in their explosiveness and their power and their speed, but they would wear down, and they didn't have one fraction of the stamina that the rugby players had. And so usually by halfway through practice, they'd be on the sidelines all lined up puking, and all the rugby guys were laughing and just keep going. So while those guys could really hit hard and really explode, they couldn't do it for long. So it really became apparent to me that the rugby player was a unique individual. He was kind of psychotic, very smart as well, and had reckless abandon. No regard for self. But there was a code. So it was a lot like hockey players. If I had to point to a group of people that have kind of the same mindset, I think it's probably hockey players. Although not a lot of fighting in rugby. It's just you always get another chance to get that guy again. So I love my time playing. I love watching it, and I tell my boys a lot about it. That was a very fun time in my life.
So I told Nick off camera also about the sticker you had on your car in high school, "Give
Yeah.
Blood, Play Rugby." And I remember there was a lot of other funny stickers that people used to put on their cars that were part of the rugby team, but they had that kind of off balance thinking, like you talk about. There's a little bit of insanity in the game.
Yeah,
Which is
the
interesting.
guys were really tight with each other. They were very close. It's kind of like going through hazing in a fraternity. It just brings you together. It's a lot like that, even though the activities are so different, but it's the same mindset. You get pulled together in this tight bond through some suffering, some incredible experiences, through a lot of character building times, and
So,
a
so
lot of fun.
tell Nick about that one time that you were the most proud of your play and the concussion you took from it, that you basically busted up a play that probably shouldn't have
Yeah,
been
it was
busted.
it was kind of a wild play. There were three guys on a breakaway, and I was the fullback. And I looked around, and there was no one to help me. So I just decided for some reason to charge these three guys. And I don't exactly know what I did, but I hit all three guys at the same time as hard as I could. I launched myself. And this was about what would be the equivalent of about the 10-yard line. And they were going in for a touchdown. In our case, a try. And I launched myself at the equivalent of the 10-yard line. So I was running out of space. And I hit them so hard that people told me later that I kind of drove them backward a little until my guys could really kind of rally and get there. And everyone got there and drove them out of the try area, which is the end zone equivalent in football. They drove them out without them actually getting the ball down. And so I saved it, but I woke up on the back end of the try area facing away from the play and had no idea what had happened. So it was a crazy play, and
It's
we
all
saved.
scar. Yep.
Yeah,
It's all
it
scar.
was a very cool thing, but I had a pretty decent concussion, so that's not good. But probably explains a lot today. But it was just a memorable play that sticks out. You know,
Nick,
there were some others.
Nick, did you have a couple of concussions in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I did. Well, never diagnosed because we didn't have them back in the day.
Yeah.
They didn't exist.
Exactly.
But again, you play long enough, that's going to happen. You're going to miss time of tackle. You're going to get your friendly fire. A lot of concussions are friendly fire. You both go and tackle the same guy. But one of the things in particular, I think that we look when we talk about concussions is, it's they're not as bad as people can think, right? So it's the multiple concussions, it's the back-to-back concussions, and obviously they're serious. But a concussion in isolation isn't that bad. And I actually was speaking to two of the doctors who work with USA Rugby. They're based here in Charlotte, and they work with the Eagles. And they were saying how amazed they are and how much they love working with the rugby because of the concussion protocols that they have in place. He said that both of them said that it's one of the sports that take it so seriously, and we still don't know the ins and the outs of concussions and what we need to do. But rugby, in general, across the board, it always looks to adapt itself to make the game more attractive and safer. So again, definitely had a couple in my time. Thankfully, I still have a couple of brain cells left. But yeah, just Rob, you talking about the camaraderie and the brethren, and I've got a million stories myself. Talking about the guy that you buy the beer for after the game. There was a guy that I played against. I was playing for my high school. I play him twice a year for high school, and then I play him twice a year from my club team as well. So I played school and club, and we played against each other year on, year out for probably close to a decade. He's the only guy that I fight with on the field. And it's funny because I never knew his name and he never knew my name. And after every game, we would always sit with one another, have a laugh, have a chat. And then one of the other guy would get on the bus and head on off. But it is that you broke my nose. Thank you very much. Let me buy you a beer kind of thing, And,
Is it a respect thing? Is it a respect thing? Is that what that is?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's absolutely.
A code.
Yeah. You cross that line, everybody understands, we do this. A lot of us are weekend warriors. Some of us are blessed to go play at a competitive level, but it takes a special mentality to get on that field. And I know that I have a lot of bias in my thinking. But for me, it's one of the sports that is most representative of life. You're there, you get knocked down, you got to get back up. You knock somebody down, your job's not done, you got to get up, you got to do it again. It's such a team sport. If you lose one player out of that cog, if you get a red card or your player's out injured or somebody's down and they're not in the line, it can be catastrophic. So you push yourself as a person for your teammates just to get in that defensive line, just to be part of that team. But, and I know that a lot of team sports are like that, but just for me, Rob, like you said, you're doing it for 80 minutes, and you do want to vomit and you do want to lay down on the floor and curl up into a ball, but you can't. Well, yeah. So yeah, it's a great, analogy for life. You just got to get up and do it again.
I was telling Nick that in high school, I used to finish practice or finish a soccer game, and then I would walk over to the rugby field where some of my buddies were on the team, and I would sit there and watch and just admire and just love the sport. That's where I started loving the sport, was in high school. And I would see these guys come over with their noses sideways and their fingers sideways, and they were asking the trainer, please pop it back in so I can go back in. I mean, they're just, it's a different mentality. They didn't care how hurt they were. They didn't care if they were bleeding all over the field. They were going back in. So that's how it is.
We used to have very limited subs too. Like, it was very limited.
they've evolved it a little bit now. Obviously,
Yeah.
there's more sort of tactical stuff that's come in, and they've increased the number of guys that you can have on the bench. But yeah, same as you, Rob. When I was younger, if you were in the starting team, you're in there for the 80 minutes unless you get hurt. Nowadays, there's more kind of tactics that go with it, and that's kind of good and bad. They did it for a player welfare standpoint. They wanted to make sure that people weren't playing while they're injured. But then at the same time, when you've got a 6'5", 300-pound guy coming on with 20 minutes to go, and everybody's been playing for an hour, he can cause a bit of damage. So again, rugby's kind of cool in the way that we look at the sport and we try and figure out ways to make it better. And it's constantly evolving. Pretty much on a World Cup cycle, which is every 4 years, they look to tweak the rules and to change things and change emphases. Emphasize on different parts of the game, to make it more attractive, more appealing, safer. So it's kind of cool.
So where does rugby stand in terms of, if you compare it to soccer or football and cricket in England? Like, where is it? Is it third? Is it second? Is it tied for first? Just curious where you think
it's
it is.
definitely not tied for first. Football, which
football.
Is our soccer, that's by far in a lead. Interestingly, cricket and rugby historically were very much participation-wise with the same people. You play rugby in the winter and cricket in the summer, and a lot of stadium or grounds, rugby grounds, were both cricket ovals and rugby fields. So one of the most famous clubs in professional rugby is a club called Bath. They're out of Bath in England, and their ground doubles down as a cricket ground and a rugby ground.
I've actually been there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we've been
beautiful.
Yeah.
So, definitely in the top 5 sports, participation wise. I think rugby worldwide is going through a transition in terms of who it appeals to. Historically it was a rich man's sport. And we'll get onto that, I think, in a little bit. But now rugby's trying to be more of a all-encompassing and increase that catchment area where we're getting people who are growing up, no matter where they grow up, they get to play rugby. So
that's good. That's really good. You're going to say something, Robbie?
If you think about it, rugby is kind of ideal for every level of class of society in terms of economics, because there's no pads. There's not a lot of equipment. You get a ball. It's kind of like a lot of the third world can play soccer because the town just needs one ball and go. Rugby is a little more than that, but not much, because they don't have a lot of equipment. And you got to figure out how you're going to get the goalposts, but otherwise you can kind of get out there in a field. So
do you find that in the U.S. that there's enough rugby fields around to help with the growth of the game here in the U.S., or what do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, a couple of things on the back of that. So with Rob, with what you're saying, a lot of the smaller countries, well, not smaller countries, but countries who have that they're newer with rugby, they find that with the cost of it, that's why sevens is very popular, because you can fit 7 people in a minivan. Well, not a minivan, in a passenger van. You don't need a big bus, and you can travel a lot more. So sevens is it's where there's only 7 players on the field rather than 15, but you have a much smaller squad, so it's easier to navigate, and so it's more accessible to unions and countries that don't put as much money into rugby. And then Thomas, what was your question? Because there's definitely a point that came off of that too.
Do you feel like, now that you've been in the U.S. for a while, do you feel like there's enough facilities here in the U.S. to support the growth of the game? I mean, do we have enough fields? Do we have enough clubs? What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's enough sports fields in this country, period. I think that the amount of sports that are played over here you can never have enough sports facilities, and that's something that Rugby XV is looking into, is trying to find a more rugby specialized environment that we can actually help young rugby players grow and keep them in a controlled environment. Now, what rugby has done, and they're pretty smart with the way they've done it, is the field size is actually it's variable. So it's a minimum of 95 meters between goal line to goal line. The in-goal area, which is the try-zone or the end zone in football, is anywhere from, I believe, 6 meters on the in-goal area to 22 meters. So essentially, your field can be 144 meters long, or it can be 109 meters long, I believe. And what that's designed to do is it's designed to fit inside a soccer field. Mm-hmm. So wherever you've got a soccer field, you can put a rugby field. Not a full size one, but one that fits within the parameters of what's needed. So, just about where you can find a soccer field, you can put in a rugby field. The difference is a lot of the time the soccer fields are taken by soccer, so that's where the availability of the fields comes into play. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what we fight, from a rugby standpoint, is what facilities can we use and when can we use them? Charlotte Youth Rugby is an organization that I'm involved with. I just kind of help out a little bit. My son plays in it. And we play, our season is, their season for like U8s, U10s, U12s, the younger kids, it starts right before Thanksgiving and it finishes, in February. And basically that's designed so we can have field availability on the soccer fields because everybody else is inside either wrestling, playing basketball, or they're, enjoying Thanksgiving and Christmas. So it's a shame because we have to fit this rugby season into a winter section. But, again, rugby's creative and we'll find ways to play it regardless.
Unless Rugby XV, of course, can raise a bunch of money with sponsors, and we can build some rugby only facilities, right?
Absolutely. That's the goal. Absolutely. Yeah, that's the goal. 100%. But interestingly, so I'm an adjunct instructor at Clemson, and I've spoken to several of their linemen and other guys on in their program, and they think rugby players are crazy. They don't even want to consider it.
They are. My friend Grant, who I told you about earlier, who's the South African guy, who's also a referee, and whose son played over in Wales for a while. He argues with me all the time that he likes American football, okay, but he just doesn't think it's the same sport. And he said mainly because rugby is continuous; it never stops.
Yeah,
it's
never stops.
And he said the constant stopping all the time in American football is so distracting for him. It's just really hard for him to sit there and watch it. So, do you feel the same way?
1,000%.
Yeah. So I think if you have rugby in your blood, you want the continuous action, right?
I agree.
So we did an episode 2 weeks ago on strange sports. And I told you we do some of those filler episodes when it's off season for football. And we talked about Australian rules football, Aussie rules football. What do you think of that? I mean, they basically take a lot of the elements of rugby, but they also add the forward pass by having you hit it with your hand forward. What do you think of that? Do you like that rule?
Again, huge appreciation for what they do. I think I'm gonna be like the football guys talking about rugby and say Aussie rules football is something I wouldn't want to play. It seems a little bit more barbaric. And then there's hurling out of Ireland in the Gaelic games. Yeah, I mean that's like rugby with a baseball bat. Like it's crazy at that point. So
the Aussie rules, it seems like they do these long boots to try to get the guy to catch it and do a mark. But the problem is he gets absolutely blasted by like 2 or 3 guys. It seems like he sets the guy up every time. But I don't know. I really like watching Aussie rules. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I'm with you. I like watching all these sports. And, a good coach in my mind is somebody who's going to watch these sports and try and learn from it. You see a lot of what skill can I take from this sport and move it over to my sport. And that's the making of a good coach.
It's interesting you mentioned that because in American football, you probably know that the Philadelphia Eagles just won the Super Bowl. They have a team that is extremely powerful and physical. And they have a big left tackle who's a rugby player, Mailata. And they brought in rugby coaches to talk about a play that's really popular for the Eagles, and it's called the tush push. And they designed it like a rugby play, and so it's very interesting because it's almost unstoppable.
It's
Because
like a maul. It's like literally
yeah,
like a set
they
maul.
Ah,
Yeah,
they
okay.
you can't stop
they
it.
take the ball and snap it to the quarterback, and everybody pushes really low forward. And then two guys come behind the quarterback and push him forward. And all they usually use it for is to try and get 1 to 2 yards. But it's unstoppable. And so it's interesting that they're using rugby tactics instead of football tactics, and it makes it almost impossible to stop.
Yeah, it's so in my experience, and this might not be all over the country, but in my experience, there are NFL coaches. Pete Carroll of the Seahawks, he did a 15-minute video on rugby tackles and the rugby tackle and how they were using that. And there's you hear it a lot in college football when they're talking about the spiral punt. They call it the rugby punt. There's a lot of these things that are coming in at the NFL level and at the college level. I've got friends, who at Clemson who've talked to Dabo and his team, and I know that my friend Justin Hickey, who's at the University of Notre Dame, he's spoken to some of the football coaches, and there's interactions between them as to what information can be passed and how we can learn from one another. And it's great that it happens at the NFL level and the college level. What's a little bit disappointing is when we get to the high school level. It's almost like high school football coaches are scared of rugby and they're worried about their players getting hurt. And, we in the rugby world, we know that, we teach you how to tackle without a helmet. So if you learn how to tackle without a helmet, you're going to be a lot safer when you put that helmet on. So what we argue is that we're actually making your players safer, and we're teaching them and we're educating them on, okay, you might give up a yard on this tackle, but you're not going to be sticking your head straight in the numbers and causing neck and TBIs. So it does get a little disappointing when football coaches at the high school level don't want their players being involved in rugby. I'm of the mindset that if I've got a kid who I'm coaching who's 14, 15 years old, I'm not going to tell him what he can and cannot do with his life, because that's kind of bullying. But again, for me, I think there's so much that we can learn from one another. I'd love to see more interactions from football coaches working with rugby coaches, and not just for the information. I'm not saying rugby's better than football. I'm saying we can learn from each other, and it'd be really great if there was more of a sort of a community where the information was passed between the two.
I noticed that rugby players are much better tacklers than football players. It's just true. Football players hit, but
Better technique.
Rugby players wrap. They wrap. So.
As a rugby coach, I'd rather have a wrestler. I'd rather have a wrestler. The best is a wrestler who's played soccer. Those will convert over beautifully to rugby. And football guys do. They've got the physique, but a lot of the time we have to break some bad habits. Like you put your head in front of a tackle one time and that's it. You're not going to do that again in rugby. So
I notice it in the NFL all the time. I cannot believe how they tackle some of these guys. They lead with their head and they just hit. And they don't wrap.
They're like a missile.
They literally don't wrap.
And 90% of the time they miss.
And they miss. They
go
bounce
straight
off.
Pass.
Yeah, that's right. Well, let's go take a look at the material, guys. What do you think? All right, well, we're going to take a quick moment here to just talk about our sponsor for tonight's show. That's Academy Sports. Academy Sports, your apparel and sporting goods provider. And definitely, if you get a chance, go check out Academy Sports in your local location. So, Robbie, what do you think of Academy? Do you go there quite often?
I do. I'll tell you what, they have an awesome selection. They always have tremendous customer service, extremely friendly, but also knowledgeable. I have twin 9-year-old boys, and they have started into every single sport you can imagine, but predominantly baseball, basketball, soccer are the main ones. I get shin guards, I get cleats, I get spikes for baseball, gloves, everything. So I find myself there a lot, and I'm fortunate. It's very close to where I live, so we're there pretty frequently. But I really like the store, the merchandise, the help I get there. I always find what I'm looking for.
And I'll tell you, I went in there the other night just to kind of poke around. I knew that we had this spot coming up, and I was just absolutely blown away at how huge this place is. You know, it had the pickleball section. Of course, I love pickleball, and I bought a set of pickleballs while I was there. I got myself a new set of gym shorts. I noticed they had a rugby section, and we had this episode coming up about rugby. It had a tennis section, had a whole golfing area. The whole NFL area with all the NFL apparel was incredible. So I just had so much fun poking around there for 30 minutes, and they really can serve all of your needs.
I had a great experience buying shoes. They found the right shoe for my foot, and it was just really a cool experience.
Well, guys, go check out your local Academy Sports store. They will really friendly people. They'll help you out whatever you need. And also go check out academy.com. That's their website. They can actually ship directly to your location. If you don't want to go to a store, you can actually ship it remotely.
Yeah.
And check it out, and we'll see you next time. All right, guys. Well, this is our rugby history, rules, and popularity of the game, episode 52. Here's some great pictures here of the U.S. team up top there. The history of rugby, that's an old picture from 1910. And then some other great sketches here of rugby players, including a great game that happened a couple years ago between New Zealand and Australia, two of the top programs. You also have a logo here of USA Rugby and College Rugby Association of America. So you mentioned, Nick, you spent a little bit of time with USA Rugby.
Yeah, you know, I was involved with the high school Americans a little while ago, and that's 2011, around that time. But rugby's a relatively, close community. I know several guys who are currently working with USA Rugby. I've worked with Scott Lawrence, who is the current Eagles coach. We've done some camps together, and he's a great guy. He's a great leader, and I think the Eagles are in a good shape having him at the helm. But yeah, USA Rugby's now housed pretty much in Charlotte. They've got a lot of their operations come out of Charlotte, and it just so happens that one of the doctors lives in my neighborhood, and he and I, we're good friends. And like I say, once rugby gets in your blood, it's a pretty tight community. We typically know each other. So
would it be possible for you to be part-time consultant with USA Rugby and still do the other things you're doing, or would that take too much time?
It does happen like that. To be honest with you, my passion is in the development of sort of the 18 to 22-year-olds.
Gotcha.
And there's been decisions that I've made along the way in my coaching career that I probably could have headed more towards USA Rugby in terms of working with those guys. But for me, my passion is like I say, it's in the 18 to 22-year-olds and more growing the game. To be honest with you, the USA has the best athletes in the world. They always will have. You look at the Olympics and the medal count, and and it's the Eagles have been named the sleeping giants for about the last 40 years. It's something that I think if the US ever wanted to be truly passionate about, as an entirety, then you'd be a formidable force.
I don't know if you noticed, Japan has started to pour a lot of money into rugby and put a lot of organization. They've been hiring coaches from all over the world, and Japan has started to take it really seriously, and their results have gotten a lot better. So you're right. It's just going to be focused by the US. We have 330 million people. And if we just put our attention behind it and made it a real sport that we care about, I assume we could get really good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
For sure. So let's look at you, Nick, a little bit about your background. You mentioned growing up in England playing for the Waterloo Rugby Club. Is that the same Waterloo as what was Napoleon's Waterloo? Is that the same town?
No, it's not. No.
Okay.
It's up near Liverpool.
Got it.
Like I said, soccer area, but no, it's the Drummers are their nicknames. So
got it. That's a really good picture of you there, Nick. So you started a couple youth programs here, and then you did some college coaching at Clemson, which is great. And then
Yep.
also at Queen's University. I'm real familiar with that university here in Charlotte. I've done some guest lecturing there myself. And then you started the Belmont Abbey College program in 2019. So what were those experiences like working with the various colleges around here?
Yeah, I mean, every college has something slightly different, especially with rugby. Rugby is it's a niche sport, and it's not an NCAA sport, so a lot of the rules and regulations apply to, or that are applied for the programs are institutional. We all followed the NCAA, the GPA, minimum GPA, and all that sort of stuff. But the quotas typically, unless the institution decide that they want to go that way,
right?
It's not NCAA policy, so it's not guided by NCAA. So it's a good way for schools to bring in students, and they are any college that's enrollment driven. You find that there are rugby programs popping up because you can have, sort of easily, you can have 2 teams for each gender. So you're at 25 per team. So you're at 50 per gender. So you're at 100 extra students. And that's before you even think about starting a 3rd team, having a development team, having a sevens program. So, you could, in theory, and there are programs across the US that have, in excess of 100 players, 150 players that are all part of their rugby program. So for an admission-based or an admission enrollment-driven school, that can be quite beneficial. When I was at Clemson, we had 0 sort of interactions with admissions. So a lot of that was, getting people to be involved who already had gone to Clemson, or the recruiting was limited to, hey, would you want to come and play for Clemson? We can't get you in. We can't really give you a scholarship, but we'd love to have you. And again, if you have a good enough product, then that starts to take off. So we had a very successful stint when I was there. I was the assistant coach. My friend Justin Hickey was the head coach.
You're essentially looking at it like you're an entire program of walk-ons, is what you're saying.
Yeah, at Clemson it was. Yeah. And again, at the time, we're looking at sort of 2013 to 2017 when Clemson football was, really performing, and getting somebody interested in coming to Clemson was very, very easy. Everybody had heard of them, and it was a booming college. And so that was when you flip over to when I was recruiting for Belmont Abbey, in the rugby circles, nobody had really heard of Belmont Abbey because it was a brand new program. So, whereas everyone had heard about Clemson, but we couldn't get people in, nobody had heard about Belmont Abbey. So then I'm, trying to build that brand from scratch. So different challenges, but super interesting.
You mentioned you worked with Hunter Renfrow at Clemson, and of course he made that amazing catch against Alabama to win the championship from Deshaun Watson. But what was it like working with him? Was he working with the program itself?
No, so that was actually with my other role at Clemson. So I'm an adjunct instructor at Clemson University. So I coach fundamentals. Well, I teach fundamentals of coaching. So he was involved in that, and like I said, that's where a lot of the interactions came, where I would talk with football players about their thoughts on rugby. And but yeah, that was kind of a detached part from rugby.
I noticed yesterday he just retired from the NFL, so the whole thing's come full circle now, Nick.
Yeah, it's quick career in the NFL.
It really is. So how did you think about starting Rugby XV? What was the idea behind it? What was the impetus for starting it?
Well, a lot of it is, when you look at college sports and you look at rugby's place in college sports, there's a lot to be said for going that traditional route. Getting your degree, playing college rugby, going into the MLR draft, which it's very they've mimicked the rest of the American sports. Yeah. For me, rugby is not at the level, or it's not at the size where we can discount the the athletes who don't go to college. We've seen this change in rugby, and Rob, you were speaking to it a little bit earlier. It can transcend different levels of society. The affluent levels, and so when we look at some of the toughest guys that I ever played against were plumbers, bricklayers. If you carry bricks around all day, every day for your job, by the time you get to Saturday and you're ready to play rugby, stiff arming a guy out of the way is pretty easy. So we can't just write off all of these people who don't go to college and say we're not going to look at those people. Right. Now, because where the money is in rugby, if you want to have a full-time job being a rugby coach, you either have to be in one of the MLR programs or one of the pro teams, or you need to be in a large college program. So a lot of the good coaching, and I'm not saying the good coaching doesn't exist outside of the college and pro, but it's greatly reduced. So in order for these guys who are not going to college to get high-level coaching, it's pretty few and far between. So what Rugby XV is looking to do is to operate in the spaces that are not currently being served. So that's the impetus of what Rugby XV is, and it's born out of somewhat out of my personal sort of philosophy as to where higher education is going. I feel like we're when I was recruiting guys, I felt like it was a little bit unfair to recruit guys. If you come to me and say, I want to be a doctor, there's a route. You need to go to college. We know exactly what you got to do. Yep. A lot of these 18-year-old kids, they don't know what they want to do, but they want to play high-level rugby. And it felt wrong to have guys playing $120,000 over 5 years or whatever the amount of money was when they're not sure what they want to do. Right. And so for me, I just want there to be an alternate route for those guys.
And a lot of those kids go to trade schools, and so they should be able to go to a trade school, learn a trade, and also play rugby. So that's what you're saying.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yep.
Well, let's talk about the history of rugby. So rugby is said to have originated at Rugby School in Warwickshire, England in 1823, that during a game of soccer, this guy, William Webb Ellis, decided to pick up the ball and go with it in his hands, which, of course, was against the rules for soccer. But the Rugby World Cup trophy is now named after William Webb Ellis, which is kind of ironic. The first rules of the game came at that same school 22 years later in 1845. And then at the turn of the 21st century, the International Rugby Board, or IRB, founded in 1886, headquartered in Dublin, boasted more than 100 affiliated national unions, which was, I didn't realize it was that big. But sport still being dominated at that time by traditional powers, Australia, England, France, Ireland, etc. And then the first Rugby World Cup wasn't really that long ago, 1987, in New Zealand and Australia. And ever since then, it's been a popular financial success. And I've been watching it every 4 years since. So any thoughts about history of rugby, some of the things you've heard maybe that we haven't talked about here, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. My club that I started playing for that we talked about earlier, Waterloo, they were founded in 1889. So you can see there was they're a pretty old club. Wow. Yeah. And there's the famous William Webb Ellis picked the ball up and ran with it, and that's that's always been a fun memory or a fun story that I grew up with. And it's interesting, those powerhouses down there, they're still the powerhouses. There's nobody that's really broken into that since, which is we're waiting for those to break in, the sort of tier 2 nations to come in. Argentina, there'd be one that I'd add to that now.
Argentina, Japan, maybe.
Japan are there or thereabouts. They're not quite in that tier 1, but they're pretty close.
Maybe Italy, Samoa.
Yeah, Fiji.
Fiji. Yep, some of those teams are getting a little better.
I'll tell you, I used to live in South Africa, and I went to a game. They had Australia come in, And it was the wildest sporting event I think I've ever seen. It was insane. It was so fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty big spectacles, especially at the international level. The international rugby is thriving. And people in South Africa often talk about that World Cup in '87. They weren't invited to the 1987 World Cup. So for a lot of South Africans, they claim it started in 1991 because they weren't invited to the '87 because of the apartheid.
Because of apartheid,
Right.
Yeah.
And I was there right after apartheid, so
that's interesting. So when is USA going to be in this group, do you think? 30 years from now?
Again, talking about, they have the infrastructure and honestly, Scott Lawrence, I think is he's a special coach, and I think he is doing some really positive things with USA Rugby. There's a lot of new initiatives that are going in. You look at other nations, the way the sport is working and the way professional sport works these days. When you mentioned Japan, a lot of their players that they brought in were sort of tier 2 Kiwis. They brought in a lot of New Zealanders. You look at Ireland, who are, I haven't checked the IRB standings right now, the World Rugby standings. Sorry, they're probably 1 or 2. Ireland's probably second behind South Africa. Some of their best players are Kiwis. And just because of the transient nature of athletics these days, you're starting to see players from other countries almost recruited. There's a 5-year residency rule. Once you've been living there for for 5 years, you can then play for that country. And so I'm hoping
or if you're, if you have an English father and an American mother, or, a Japanese mother or something like that, it gives you 2 chances to play for a national team, right?
Yep. Yeah. And you can actually drop down from a tier 1 to a tier 2 nation. So a lot of the New Zealand All Blacks, they have, players who are Tongan, they have Fijians, they have, and Samoans. Once you're done with your, sort of your All Black career, they do allow you to drop down to a tier 2 nation like Samoa. So if you're a Samoan and you play for the All Blacks, they will allow you to then go and play for Samoa.
I always wondered, Nick, why don't the United Kingdom all play together? Why doesn't England and Ireland and Scotland and Wales all play together? They'd be unstoppable. I guess you really think of yourself as separate countries, I guess, right?
Well, I mean, we certainly are, but there's something that's really, really cool that I don't know if you guys know about this, but this summer they have the British and Irish Lions, and that is a touring team. So it's a group, it's almost like a select side or an all-star team, and they take the best players from England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, and they combine them, right? And they're all these professional athletes. They're all, the best players in the world, but there is that social element behind the elite level sport. So it is very much known as a tour, so they'll be playing they'll be playing Australia. They play every 4 years, and it goes Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. So, every 12 years they'll play New Zealand, every 12 years. But what's really cool about it is you have all these pro level athletes, international athletes, best players in the world. They play against each other every single year for club, country, and then every 4 years they come together and they go as a combined British team, British and Irish Lions team.
That's amazing.
And some of the best documentaries that you can find on rugby. There's a All or Nothing series on Amazon. It's actually focused on the All Blacks, but they play against the British and Irish Lions in that. And so it's a really cool concept. And a lot of people will talk about, well, is it antiquated? Should we get rid of it? These are pro athletes now. But the stories that come out of that, they're the old school traditional rugby stories that are still existing in the professional game. And it's not all the time. But one of the most, one of the stories that I know of is that for the team bonding for one of the tours. In recent years, they bought like several crates of beer. They locked the door and they put all the players in there, and that was it. That was the team bonding. So yeah, it's kind of a nod to the past, but still with elite players.
So Australia and New Zealand are huge rivals. Who would you say is England's biggest rival?
Everyone in the world.
So it's not South Africa. It's not Ireland.
So it's funny because England don't really have a rival. I'd say the oldest international game is England-Scotland. And basically England don't have a rival, but England are everybody's rival. So everybody wants to beat England. The Welsh in particular don't like the English, the Scottish. I think the Irish don't mind us, but everybody wants to beat England.
For sure.
So, but the England-Scotland will probably be either England-Scotland or England-Wales, because we're landlocked with them.
Got it.
So
I'll tell you, that's mad respect.
It is.
Yeah.
I would say France has been really surprising the last couple of World Cups. They're a really good team now.
Yeah.
You can't take them for granted anymore.
They play their own style of rugby. There's more money in the French domestic game than anywhere else in the world. And they play a style of rugby that's very fast, and it's been like this for decades. The only thing about the French is that they are typically known for, they're great to watch, but when it comes down to it and the rubber meets the road, they don't always get over the finish line, and they have a history of choking, for want of a better term.
Do you think that's because of conditioning? That would be my guess.
Because they were able to win the sevens at the France Paris games this past summer. They were able to win sevens, but I don't know if that was just because it was home field advantage or what it was. But
yeah, the crowd was going crazy at those games for them.
I was pretty proud of the U.S. women who got the bronze. That was a pretty nice showing.
Yeah, I mean that's something in this country that I could definitely see the women becoming the world powerhouse before the men, just based off of where they're at now and how far they've got to go.
Like American women in soccer have gotten to be so good and so dominant.
Yes, yeah. And Ilona Maher is one of the she is the sport's biggest profile now. She's overtaken everybody.
Yeah, she's fantastic.
Yeah.
This is interesting to find out how rugby got its name. I didn't realize this, but it comes from that town called Rugby, where the school is. And it got its name from the Anglo-Saxon word Haraka Burr. And Burr looks a lot like we say Berg, like Pittsburgh, which meant rook fort. And a rook is a bird that's very popular in that area. It's very similar to a crow. You can see the bird right there, the rook. And Burr, which was fort, eventually became B, was shortened to B. So rugby came from that original Anglo-Saxon word. So it was really interesting to see that.
Yeah, I definitely didn't know that.
Yeah, I know. Rook fort.
Rook fort.
Did you ever see any rooks around where you lived?
Lots of crows and blackbirds, but I'm not a bird man, so I assume they're around, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I finally now know what rugby and where it came from. So very interesting. So some of the rules of the game: 2 teams try to score points on each other by grounding the ball in the opponent's try zone. And players can run with the ball, pass it backwards, or kick it. And I also noticed that they can pass it sideways, correct? As long as it's lateral correctly sideways and not at all forward.
So, that's pretty much true. There is so long as though your hands, when you release the ball, are moving backwards, the ball can technically move forwards.
Okay.
It's a long, because of inertia. So sometimes you will see a pass that looks like it's forwards, but as long as the hand motion is releasing the ball backwards, that's what is considered a backwards pass.
I got it. Okay. Then offside, a player is offside if they're in front of a teammate who has the ball or last played it. Do they call offsides a lot in rugby? I haven't noticed that very much.
Yeah, there's a lot at the breakdown. You almost have a new line of scrimmage every tackle, just like you do in football. So there is an offside line, and it's the back foot of your own teammate who's in the ruck.
Now, if the referee enforced every single time they're offside, the game would not be the flowing game it is, right? So they must give some leeway, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the nice thing about rugby, and not to pick apart your PowerPoint there, rugby doesn't have rules; it has laws, and the difference is that it's open to an interpretation. So a lot of the time, less so now, but you get to see referees in there and what they, you know, some referees are very keen on the offside line. They want to make sure that everybody's on side. Some referees don't care as much. They want the game to flow more. So you actually almost have to, as a team, start analyzing what style the referee likes to play, which is another element of the game. And for me personally, especially when you get into the youth side of things, I like referees who just want the game to play. You know, if I see a U10 player or a U12 player and they make a slightly forward pass or they slightly knock the ball on, I prefer to just see the referee, you know, just say play on, just let him play, because, you know, it's very stop-start, and it becomes a lot like another sport if you blow the whistle every time there's a minor infraction. So, you know, for the younger kids, we want to see them playing more. We want to see them running around more and enjoying the game more. So for me, that's
I think you're exactly right. For the youth, you should let it play 100%. I do have to think at the higher levels, they kind of try to figure out the referee's style in the first 5 or 10 minutes, right? To see if he's going to call it tight or not call it tight.
At the very top level, they've already analyzed them. They got video analysis. You know, there's a full written report on what kind of style this guy is going to go with, and yeah, it's pretty in depth.
Interesting. And thank you for correcting me on rules versus laws. I did know that, actually. So rucks and mauls, when a player is tackled, a ruck or a maul is formed. My question there is, how do you know which one to form, a ruck or a maul? Like, is it a situation, how many players are around it, or?
No.
Rob, do you want to get it?
It has to do with if one's on the ground and one's standing up.
Yeah.
Is that how you would define it?
Absolutely. So a maul is when the players are still on their feet, and a ruck is when the tackled player has gone to ground. They changed the laws of the maul in the early 2000s, maybe even in the late 90s, where if you take the ball into contact and the opposition holds you up in a maul, they will get possession. So the maul has become a bit of a specialized thing for just lineouts now. They only use it kind of in one area of the game because you risk losing the ball if you take it into a maul. Whereas in a ruck, it's more protected. You get the possession back.
It's interesting you say that, because in American football, you can also lose the ball, and basically someone can strip it out of your hands. So that's interesting.
That's very different than when I played.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, the maul is also very similar to the play Rob was talking about earlier in American football, the tush push. Very similar to the maul, because once that momentum gets going, the defense can't stop it. It's just pure driving with legs. Yeah, I actually love the maul. I like when they score on it too. So scrums are used to start play after minor infringements and when the ball is unplayable. So what is your thought about scrum and the rule of scrum and how that adds to the play?
Scrums come from if you pass the ball forward or you knock the ball on, which means you drop it and it bounces forward. And to be honest, the scrums are a game within the game. There's you know, it's not like the line of scrimmage where you automatically get possession of the ball like in football. You can steal somebody's ball in the scrum. If you have a strong scrum, you can push them off the ball. You can hook the ball back and steal the ball that way. So it's a contest for the ball, and the amount of strength and sheer force that is involved in a scrum is incredible. There's a video on YouTube of a scrum against the Formula One car, and they're holding the Formula One car as the wheels are spinning, because that, you know, 8 people pushing in one direction in a synchronized way is a very powerful thing.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible.
What is the toughest scrum you ever played against? Like what team level was it?
I mean, to be honest, the bigger the humans and the stronger the players. The Americans have pretty good scrums because they're strong. You know, and it's a lot of it is getting in a low body height, you know, a good athletic position. You know, so yeah, getting the team that gets lowest typically wins, you know, because they get underneath and they can lift up the team that they're driving against.
And were you happy as a fly half or a scrum half that you didn't have to be in there with
Absolutely
the front lineman and the hooker and all those guys?
Yep. Yeah, so as the scrum half, you're the one who puts the ball in, and that was close enough for me. Probably too close, but
absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, do you know the one guy who has the helmet on that's in the scrum itself? I guess it's to protect his ears, right?
Yeah, so I mean that's a personal choice, but a lot of sort of second rows and front rows will wear those to stop getting cauliflower ears. So yeah, that's a you know, other people will wear them too. It's not just limited to the scrum, but typically when you see guys with the tape around the head, it's to stop the friction on the ears or to hide the blood that's from the burst cauliflower ear.
Do you think that all players should move to maybe a light helmet, maybe not an American football helmet, but something kind of light just for head protection? Or is
Honestly,
that not necessary?
no.
No.
Honestly, for me, I don't think it is. I think the level of protection that you get from those scrum caps, that it's padding, so it's nice for, you know, if you're going to catch a stray cleat or something like that. But my fear with really pushing a lot of the headgear is that you then get this false sense of security that you can use it like a helmet. It's good for scratches and scrapes, and, you know, like I say, you know, you might save a few stitches on the top of your head, but in terms of preventing concussions, it's not going to do what we want it to do. You know, and therefore and this is just me personally, I think that if you start using them and referring to them as helmets or, you know, that sort of stuff, and that becomes the mindset, then people are then going to have this, well, I can just put my head in the spokes, you know. So
and then they're gonna start doing the wrong type of tackling where they lead with their head and things like that, right? So
yeah, that would be my fear for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So in tackling, players can only tackle players who have the ball. So that's a kind of important thing. What is the infraction if you tackle somebody who doesn't have the ball?
So if you tackle someone without the ball, it's going to be a penalty, a straight arm penalty, which is, you know, kind of like a penalty in football. If you do it egregiously, if it's well away from the play, then that's probably going to be a yellow card or a red card for taking somebody out of the game who's not got the ball.
But this is the kind of penalty where they could potentially kick a 3-pointer from there if it was close enough? Okay, got it. Scoring a try is worth 5 points, and when scored, the player has to touch the ball to the ground. So one thing I never really understood is if they get held up and they don't get it to the ground and the ball gets pushed out or knocked away or something like that, what happens? Does the defensive team get the ball, or does the ball come out to the 5-yard line? Okay, so it's like a touch.
If you're if you're attacking and I held you up in the in goal area, you don't get the try. And I think, you know, it'd be really interesting to see football do that. You know, you don't just catch the ball in the air in the in goal area in the end zone. Like, you have to get that ball down on the ground. It adds an element, and it adds, even when somebody's in that in goal area in rugby or the end zone in football, like, you haven't scored yet. So it still gives the defense a chance to get themselves underneath the ball. If you try and place the ball on the ground and I get my body underneath, you haven't grounded it. So it's still not a try. So I can just dive underneath the ball and prevent you from scoring. So it's a cool nuance.
And then the conversion's worth 2 points after a try. I did notice that you want to try to score as close to the goalpost as possible to make your try conversion easier rather than having to do the angle from way out.
Yeah, if you score in the corner, you got to take it from in line with where you put the ball down. So it makes it a much harder kick if you score in the corner.
And then there's no blocking to help the runner, which of course there is blocking in American football. So that's a big difference. It's essentially, the runner's on his own. All you can do is support him to give him someone to pass to. And then players must let go of the ball and release it when tackled. And I know that there's actually a penalty if you hold on to it and don't release it right away.
Mm-hmm.
So any other big rules or laws you would mention here, Nick, before we move on?
I mean, the only thing right now is sort of the tackle zone is what we're calling it. It's, anywhere beneath the sternum. So again, with rugby, trying to have some initiatives that really protect players. They're very keen on getting the tackles below the sternum. So you're seeing a lot more sort of yellow and red cards right now for high tackles. And that's because the referees are trying to police dangerous tackles out of the game as much as possible. Rugby's really trying to protect its players.
Yep, that's good. That's really good. I did notice, even at the pro level, Nick, that people make business decisions even in rugby, just like they do in football. And that tackling really is kind of a mentality. I mean, there's some players that are good at it and some players willing to do it and others that don't.
Yeah.
And I even noticed, even at the World Cup level, you'll see some of the guys who are the smaller guys that when they see a bigger guy barreling through, they're just not going to take the chance, I guess you could say. Maybe they'll grab his leg, but
yeah, you got to get in the way, and some of us refer to as putting yourself in the spokes. When if there's a bicycle going by, you got to put yourself in the spokes to stop the bike, and that's almost the mentality. Have you got the guts to do it? So
like
Tom, I got to be honest. I when I hear you talk about business decisions in football, it's definitely real, but I never saw that in rugby. No.
Okay.
I don't care how small a guy was. He was going to tackle that guy, period.
Interesting.
That was my experience.
Because I see some of these guys from like Samoa that look like they're about 6'3", about 250 pounds, and they can run like the wind.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to imagine and their legs are like tree trunks.
But Tom, the little guy on the other side is going to die trying.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think I misunderstood what you were saying, but yeah, no, absolutely. You give it your best shot.
When I say business decision, because in the NFL it happens too, where the little cornerback, when they see Derrick Henry coming through, they don't want any part of him, right?
Yeah, Derrick Henry's coming with so much force that the corner is going to do an ole, like
I'll let the linebacker take him. Yeah.
I never saw that in rugby.
It's interesting you both said that even the young guy or small guy will try to take him. So this is interesting, looking at our rugby positions, and I'd love to hear, Nick, which ones you've played. I know you've played fly half and scrum half. If you look through this chart here, you got your right wing, you got your left wing, left center, right center. The scrum half looks like they line up across from each other. Fly half kind of do the same, and then the right and left wings line up across from each other, and then the fullbacks are in the far deep area, which is what Rob played. So what are these? Which ones of these positions have you played, or which ones have you not played, I guess?
So in competitive games, I mean, it's grouped all together as forwards there. In the back line, which is the scrum half, fly half, left wing, right wing, fullback, inside center, and outside center. I've played all of those in a competitive game. I played several positions in the forwards in a competitive game. And again, like, the majority of my playing days, I played scrum half and fly half. Sometimes you just gotta pitch in and play different positions. And honestly, I think for me, again, just with that coaching brain, I always had this thirst for knowing what it was like and what was needed at each position. So bouncing around and playing different positions gave me a more holistic view of the game itself. But when you think about body positions, your backs, certainly your wings and your fullback are usually you're more agile, you're faster guys. Your centers are strong, hard ball carrying, probably similar to a running back. And then as you move forwards, you've got your scrum half and fly half there, obviously both, like we said, the quarterbacks. But then when you get into the forwards, then you start looking at the front row. An average build these days is probably 6 foot, not too much over 6 feet tall in the front row.
Mhm.
Very stocky, very strong, very good at low center of gravity.
Mhm.
Same, that's prop, hooker, and prop. That's in the front row. Your locks are your second rows. They're usually tall.
Mhm.
They operate in the line out, and in the line out, a player will jump and two people will support him in the air. So it almost looks a little bit like cheerleading. You know, you throw a 6'4", 6'5" guy up in the air as high as he goes to catch the ball. It's like a throw in soccer, but with cheerleading attached to it.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then your back rowers are just the psychopaths of the team who go around and hit everything they possibly can. And make as many tackles as humanly possible. So
That's good.
they call them the sort of the hyenas and the scavengers.
So when you work with the youth here in the United States, does it take them a lot of time to figure out these positions, where they need to be, the positioning on the field, how far back from the line? Does it take a while for them to figure that all out, or does it come naturally after a while?
No, it's pretty challenging. And one of the things that I find interesting is a lot of the youth who love playing the game, they don't watch a lot of it. Now, I don't know if that's because of access. It's not on mainstream TV. It's on various, it's on Peacock. It's on various
Mhm.
other apps and channels, but a lot of them don't typically watch it. So I feel like the interactions that they're having with the sport, it takes them longer to learn where they need to be and what positions that they need to be in.
Interesting.
The other thing I think you got to be careful, with me naming your stereotypical body position for each of those positions. As a coach, you've got to be pretty careful that you don't take a look at a guy who's 6'5" and say, well, you've got to play second row because you're 6'5". Even though, we were looking earlier on the very first page on your presentation, there was a guy right in the middle. It's Jonah Lamu, and he was a 6'4" winger, and he was a powerhouse and changed what everybody saw a winger as. So again, I think you got to get outside your comfort zone sometimes and take players on their strengths rather than their body position. But
Rob, did you ever play anything other than fullback?
Yeah, I played wing forward, which I guess you're calling it a lock.
No, that's a flanker. A wing forward is typically on the side of the scrum.
I was on the side. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're flankers. Wing forward is a different term for it. But yeah, typically they're known as a back row or a flanker these days.
Yeah. I played that some, but I was mostly fullback, which you wouldn't normally play those two positions body type wise, I don't think.
Yeah.
Not really.
Well, one reason is because Rob was a goalie in soccer, and he was really good at punting the ball. He could punt the ball way beyond half field. And
yeah, I was a kicker.
So they found out very early on that as fullback he could do those very long kicks downfield. So
also I was decent. I was pretty decent tackler. So like as a fullback, you're the last line.
Yeah, that's
right. Absolutely, just like a goalkeeper.
Yeah, you better put that guy on the ground no matter what, or it's over.
Looking at the field of play, you mentioned there's different sizes of fields of play, but this was kind of the standard one that I found: 69 meters wide, 100 meters maximum long. You got your tri-line, you got your 22-meter line, which is marked off, the 10-meter and 10-meter line with your halfway line in the middle, and then your dead ball line and your what we call end zone or tri-zone in this case. So is this typically what most of the fields look like here in the U.S., or are you guys still challenged to get this much space?
It's usually a little bit. It's pretty close to that, to be honest. Sometimes we find that if the only field available would be a football field, then we'd be a little bit narrower. But the majority of the time, we can find a soccer field that allows us to have these dimensions. Certainly, the higher up you go, the college level, you start looking at the facilities that they have, and this is a pretty typical size field.
So it looks like it's almost exactly the same as a American football field, maybe a little different.
Soccer field, same size as a soccer field. Like
a 100-yard football field would be Not too far off from
That's
100.
would be 110 yards is 100 meters.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's pretty close, right?
It's
In terms of
comparable.
length.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only big difference between a rugby field and a football field is the width.
Wider.
69, because 69 meters is much wider.
Yes, it is. Yeah, for sure. It's
And
much
they need
more
the
like a
space
soccer.
because it's 15 on 15
That's right. Yeah, good point.
instead of 11 on 11.
So about the same length, but much wider. Okay. So in terms of the ball itself, it's an oval and less pointed than the ball used in gridiron football. It's 28 to 30 centimeters or 11 to 11.8 inches long, and it's 22.9 to 24.4 inches in length. Weighs about 410 to 460 grams, and then the outside casing can be either leather or plastic. So what do you guys typically play with? Is it leather or plastic?
So I actually have one right here. It's a synthetic.
Okay.
But I don't know if you can see it's got it's more of a rubber and it's got grips on it. So it's easier to catch than say a leather ball. The dimples on it are a little bit more aggressive than you'd find on a football.
And does it spiral better than a leather ball too? Better spiral on it?
I'm not sure, to be honest. We don't spiral as much as we used to in terms of our kicks. And then the passes, depending on how far you're passing, you might not want to use a spiral pass. For short range passes, we don't typically spiral the ball.
Because I noticed some of the scrum halves and some of the fly halves, they can really whip the ball across the field. I mean, skipping multiple guys all the way out to the edge. Pretty incredible.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's a larger ball, so you're not going to be able to throw it, all the way downfield. But probably a decent range pass would be anywhere from sort of 10 meters to 25 meters in terms of your pro level stuff. They can throw further, but typically that's kind of the range that you're looking at.
Got it. Yeah, it looks to me like that Webb Ellis ball would be a lot easier to work with than the old-fashioned leather ball. So I can understand why synthetic is a lot bigger now. Yeah,
the ball that I started playing with didn't quite look like that match ball on the right there, but it was a leather ball like that. And when those things got wet, it was like a bar of soap. So it was not easy and didn't make for attractive rugby.
I bet it didn't. So some of the differences between rugby union and rugby league, you've already mentioned a couple, Nick. Rugby union and rugby league differ in the number of players, scoring rules, pitch size. Union has 15, rugby league has 13. In a try in rugby union is 5 points. In rugby league, it's 4 points. Conversion, 2 points both. Rugby union, in a line out, players lift teammates to catch the ball thrown in. In rugby league, play restarts with a tap kick. And then possession in rugby league, a team loses possession after being tackled 6 times. So you mentioned that there's kind of a limit in the amount of possession you can have, kind of like football.
Yeah. Yeah, what's interesting is where I grew up is actually rugby league country. So I grew up in the north of England, which is more rugby league than rugby union. Of course, I got into it because of my father, and he was from down south, so that's why I played rugby union. But rugby league originates from, as we were talking about the social classes earlier, the northern towns, the northern industrial towns, kind of from where I'm from. They had a lot of their players were mill workers, and worked in factories, and when they played rugby on a Saturday or a Sunday, they were finding it very difficult to get up for work on Monday. They played a really tough game of rugby over the weekend, and so they were struggling to go to work for these manual labor jobs. And so there was a movement to professionalize rugby. The upper class, the white collar guys who played rugby union did not want to professionalize their sport. They wanted to keep it amateur. And so they refused to make it professional. And that's when you got the split between rugby union and rugby league. They are two very different sports, but the crossover is so tight that you do have coaches and players that will transcend both of the codes.
Makes sense. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I talk to my friends who are big rugby players, fans, whatever, and they always talk about, they're very much purists. They think that rugby union's the only sport to think about, that you have to have 15 players. Rugby league 13, that's not the way to go. Sevens is not a great sport. They're kind of rugby purists. So do you feel that way, or do you think most rugby people feel that way?
There's definitely people who feel that way. My preference, I prefer rugby union. I prefer 15s as a player. As a coach, I really like coaching sevens.
Okay.
It's faster paced. You've got to make
I
quicker
love sevens.
decisions. Yeah, the impact of a decision in sevens is instant. If you make a mistake in sevens, like, if you have to get over it, and you have to get over that mistake within seconds.
Right.
You can't waste the time dwelling on a bad mistake. You have to flush it right out of your system right away.
Do you think the Olympics made a good decision by going to sevens instead of 15s?
Absolutely. And most of it's on the marketability. You can have 24 teams playing in one day's competition in one stadium, and that's really good for getting behinds in seats and getting a lot of different diverse people in a stadium. So again, from a marketing standpoint, it's good. And if you were to do it like 15s, you'd end up having another Rugby World Cup, and that takes, the Rugby World Cup is typically over about 10 weeks.
Right. And I think that it's good that the Olympic product is different from the World Cup product. I really do. It's a different sport, and I think it's better that way.
Absolutely. You can't fit. I'm not sure the exact date. I think it's 6 days, but there is a limit onto how many rugby games you can play in a week. Again, going back to player welfare. Now, sevens, you can play 5 games in a weekend, 6 games in a weekend, but with 15s, you're limited to sort of 1 a week. So
that's true. Yeah, Rob, you said you really like sevens.
I love it. It's very athletic.
Yeah, the speed is a lot.
Everyone needs to be able to run. Everyone needs to be able to tackle.
Yeah, it's a lot faster.
It's one good move. You can juke the one person who could tackle you, and you can go to the house.
I think for American fans who like speed anyway, I think sevens just hits with them a lot more for a broader audience. That's just what
if you remember back to the U.S. women's, they were getting buried at that time. U.S. girl did a couple of jukes and was gone, and she won it right there at the end of the game. It was unbelievable.
Right. Yeah, it was great. So looking at the growth of rugby worldwide, this is pretty incredible just to see the growth of it. You have 9.6 million people playing rugby globally. In terms of engagement, you had 857 million watch the Rugby World Cup. So it's essentially, I think you said, Rob, what is it, the third most watched event in the world now, the Rugby World Cup?
It's the third largest sporting event in the world.
Yeah, so that is just incredible for the game, the fact that we're getting that much interest. So what are your thoughts, Nick, about kind of the growth globally, and then we'll talk about US?
Yeah, I mean, it's a sport that's growing in certain pockets. Australasia, it's very popular. New Zealand, it's a way of life. South Africa, it's not sure if it's the number one sport. It's certainly hugely, the nation is basically, intertwined with their identity is in the Springbok jersey, for a lot of them. And it's great to see the growth of the game. I think, there's a transition period for rugby right now across the world where it's finding its way to become a safer sport while also elevating it as a viewing spectacle. I think that they're really looking at how they can make it look better, appeal more. And one of the really, really interesting conversations that's going on right now across rugby, and it's almost interesting that we've kind of touched on it a little bit, is that rugby has this great sense of core values and respect and honor and You know, and there's this, you know, there is the code that Rob spoke about earlier. And one of the things that certain media outlets are talking about is that code, the honor and the handshake and all that sort of stuff,
Yes.
is that marketable in today's day and age? You know, I looked at the sort of, I don't watch hockey. You know, it's just, I don't have nothing against it. I just don't watch it.
Right.
But I know that 2 weeks ago, you know, the US played Canada and there was booing during the anthem, and you know, people in this day and age, if you've got a villain, that can really help your sport. So there's this conversation that's going on right now about rugby is, are we being too humble and too gentlemanly and, you know, not really allowing, because it can be quite sanitized at times. You know, don't over celebrate, you know, if you score a try, and that's not appealing to young folk. You know, they want to express themselves. They want to have, you know, these big personalities. You know, rugby doesn't really have your Cristiano Ronaldo. It doesn't really have these huge global megastars. And it's partly because we try and stay humble. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but it's just interesting that doesn't grab the, you know, you're not going to make it to Sports Center, you know, based off of that.
The branding.
I mean, when you see an NFL player score a touchdown, they do their dance and they have their whole posse around them. And you're right, there's an excitement level to it. I don't know. I think there's a group around the world who really respect the fact that rugby's humble. I mean, you look at the bottom of this screen here: integrity, passion, respect, solidarity, and discipline. And that really, those 5 words really say what the sport is. And I think there's a lot of people who respect that. So I don't know.
Absolutely, and it's kind of like, how do we harness those core principles and give the media access and give people the access to see the other parts of the sport. You know, once you fall in love with the sport, you're in the sport. But how do we get more people to fall in love with the sport? That's kind of the main question that's going on right now.
I don't know. When you have 900 million people watching an event, I think there's definitely some love of the sport. What do you think of Six Nations rugby and their goal to try to have international competition in between the World Cup?
Yeah, so the Six Nations has been running a lot longer than the World Cups. The Six Nations used to be the Five Nations. It's an annual event, and it's the Northern Hemisphere's premier competition between World Cups. You know, you've got, you know, the Six Nations are usually in the top 10 nations in the world. You know, you throw in Australia, Argentina, New Zealand. You know, they have their own competition down in the Southern Hemisphere, but the Six Nations it's happening right now. There's a documentary on Netflix as well that kind of covers the sort of the backstory of the players.
I saw that.
It's a great brand.
And why isn't Germany in there? Like, I don't understand. They're looking at England, they're looking at France, they're looking at Italy getting better. And you would think Germany with 90 million people would be a rugby country. I don't know.
Yeah, for whatever reason, they've never really taken off in Germany. And unlike soccer, where you've got a quite robust European competition, you know, you got Spain, Portugal. You know, you think about soccer, just about every European country has a pretty decent national team.
Yes.
But rugby, you know, Sweden, Denmark, Germany, you know, those teams, they're not competing. And again, maybe that's because of the landlocked ring fence Six Nations. You know, there's nowhere for those teams to grow into right now, because the Six Nations are basically, those Six Nations have decided they're going to play every year. And that's it. They're playing between each other. They're not letting anybody else in. So as a German team, where do you go? You play in the second tier against, you know, Georgia have a good team. Spain are up and coming, but they're still quite a long way away from you know, the Englands, the Irelands, the Scotlands, and the Wales.
So looking at growth of rugby in USA, of course, at the youth level, it's up 21% in the last 2 years. And I know, Nick, you have a big part of that, but really good to see. That's really how it gets started, is that youth rugby is really growing in the United States. And then when it comes to MLR viewership and sponsorship and participation and overall growth and attendance, the league is just growing and growing and growing every year. So we're starting to get some real kind of pro rugby to be looking at here in the United States. And then when it comes to our power rankings in the college level, my friend Grant's son, I told you, went to Life University. They're number 1 this year. You got teams like Navy and St. Mary's and Cal and BYU. Of course, UCLA has always been a really good program. So what are your thoughts about these college programs, and can this help drive a kind of new generation of rugby players that get to the pro level?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think when we look at the growth of the youth, that's the most important stat. I think, again, the level of competition at the collegiate level is awesome. And that's something that, it's great for right now. If we want the US to be better and to compete on the world stage, like we were talking about earlier, that 21% of the growth in the US, that's the key figure. That's the one that we want to focus on. Like I said, you've got a lot of athletes in this country and a lot of powerful athletes that we can convert, to be decent rugby players. It's the difference between the US and, say, a New Zealand right now is when you look at the level of athlete that you have at the very top level of rugby, the US players equal the New Zealanders, because when you have an elite level athlete, it's 1% between them that really decides things. But the difference is that every one of those New Zealand players grew up with a rugby ball in their hand from the moment they could walk. And so no matter how far, when we focus on college rugby, some of those guys in some of those teams, Lindenwood, Life, Navy, they've only been playing for 4 years, 5 years. Some of them may have been playing 10 years, but they haven't, of their 22 years, they haven't had a rugby ball in their hand for 18 of them. So that's where we really need to focus on that 21% and increasing that number. But again, you look at the collection of colleges in those power rankings, different types of schools, different areas. Davenport in Grand Rapids, Michigan. That's a program that again, I was talking about it earlier. It's more of an admissions driven or an enrollment driven program. So they're using the rugby team to drive their enrollment, and they've got a lot of success from it. They've got some of the best rugby players out there. So that school and Life University have often done this. They have gotten national attention. They're seen on some national branded. They're on Peacock for several things, and it used to be NBC carried some of the rugby, and outside of rugby, Life University wasn't a huge brand. So now they're becoming more known through the use of rugby. So rugby is a vehicle for their growth.
Sure. Rob, what was your NIL question you had for Nick?
How much is NIL seeping into those programs that you're aware of?
With rugby not being NCAA, it's good and it's bad. We can pick and choose what we follow and what we don't follow. I'm sure that, once the NIL stuff has settled down with NCAA and they know exactly how it's going to work and how it's going to interact over the next 5 to 10 years, rugby will be 5 to 10 years behind that in terms of figuring out how we react to it.
So NIL probably hasn't touched rugby yet, just because it's always going to be trailing behind some of the bigger sports, is what you're saying.
Yeah, pretty much. And I'm not sure, somebody's asked me once before, like, do you think the rugby should be an NCAA sport? And I don't know that I believe that it should, because right now there are a lot of flexibilities that come with not being an NCAA sport, in terms of recruiting and blackout dates and that sort of stuff. It allows rugby to grow, in its current environment. So,
got it. So here's a really good question to ask you guys as we're coming to the end of the presentation. First, this one is, Why is rugby popularity growing? And these were 7 things I could think of. First one is part of the culture. So many of the biggest rugby countries have been playing rugby for over 150 years. And so, the USA obviously doesn't have that culture yet, and we're trying to build that. Coaching is available. In the past 30 years, coaching is now available all over the world to help teams in as many countries to learn the game, like yourself, Nick, coming to the US. You got team building. So rugby's that great team sport. Both of you talked about how much you love your teammates and the camaraderie and the team building it provides. The low cost to play, like Rob said, you can just roll a ball out there on the field and kids can play the game as long as they have a field to play on. Similar to other games, it's an offshoot from soccer or Aussie rules or American football. It's got similarities to all those different games. So it helps for, kids who are learning to play the game to compare it to the other game they already know how to play. Fun to play. And then, of course, you have World Cup, Six Nations, Olympics, and other big tournaments that are generating a lot of interest in the game. So anything we've missed here, Nick or Rob, that you can think of about why the popularity is growing?
I certainly don't think so. I think the 2 that stick out for me on that list are number 1 and number 6. I think we've got to make it fun for kids to play, and then once they're in the game, then we got to continue the culture and the traditions that's kept it successful for the last 150 years. But again, for me, regardless of the level that I coach at, it's a game. And it's a sport, and it needs to be enjoyed. And I think that is the most important part of it. There's so much that comes from competitive sports, and I'm certainly competitive as a coach, and I want to win, and I want to be successful. But for me, the most important thing is that we never lose sight of the fact that it's a sport, it's a game, and it's supposed to be enjoyed. And I think that for me, if you put my feet to the fire and told me to pick one, it'd be number 6. It's got to be enjoyable.
And you heard what Rob said. I mean, the first time he played it, he said how fun it was. Right, Rob?
Yeah, I found it amazingly fun. It needs to stay that way for sure for the health of the game. So I'd love to see American youth get more involved in the sport. And I can't speak to other countries, even though I've lived in a lot of countries. I can't speak to how foreign countries are seeing the youth movement towards or away from rugby and related to the head injury issue. I assume that it's sort of a ripple effect everywhere, but.
What do you think, Nick? Does it make sense to get them involved earlier and be able to explain to parents how they're going to avoid injury?
Absolutely. And, I think that it's key that, and it can help football players learn better technique for their tackles, and it can really benefit them. I think, as Rob said, there is this huge misconception that rugby is, and this is a saying that makes me shudder. It's football without pads. It's not football without pads. It's completely different. And if you treat it like football without pads, then people are going to get hurt, and they're going to get hurt quick. But all rugby coaches, we begin with safety. That's the paramount of our sport, because we understand that it's a collision sport. Injuries are going to occur. But we mitigate as much as we can with proper technique. And the proper technique is, how can we effectively tackle somebody safely? Not how can we hit them harder, not how can we, put them into next week. Like, how do we do this safely and efficiently? And I think that Rob, you've hit the nail on the head. We've got to change the mentality that rugby is this dangerous sport, and kind of in a joking sense, the bumper sticker of "Give Blood, Play Rugby."
Yeah,
that's the sort of thing that at college we find funny, and then as we become parents, we think, "Oh,
it's a horror show."
What does the average soccer mom think when they see that?
They run away from that.
Absolutely, and again, anyone one of the things that frustrates me a little bit is that at the youth level, and it bleeds over from football, and I understand it, and people think I'm being callous, is when there's an injury on the field, and it's not a serious injury. It's just, it's a kid sprained an ankle, and everybody on the rugby field takes a knee. And I understand why they do it, because that's come over from football. But for me, what I see is, kids could sprain an ankle 3 or 4 times a game. So we've got 3 or 4 breaks in play where somebody's taking a knee. Now, if it's serious, I totally agree. Like, let's take a knee, be respectful. Right. But for the average soccer mom who's looking over at the rugby field and she sees everybody taking a knee every 5 minutes, those things are part of rugby. The injuries aren't always serious. A lot of the time they're minor, but it's like life, like you are going to get injured in life, so you do your best to avoid it. But when it happens, you got to deal with it. So
you got to learn the techniques at a young age to avoid it, like you said. So looking at the world rankings this year, we got South Africa on top again on the men's side, Ireland, New Zealand, the All Blacks, France, Argentina, England sitting in 6th, Scotland, Australia, Fiji, and Italy. So those are kind of like your top 10 you always see. It just scrambles based on the year. Any surprises there, Nick, in this top 10?
No, and it's pretty fluid. South Africa have won the last 2 World Cups in a row. Ireland have been great for a long time. New Zealand are one of the most, successful sports teams of all time across any sport. Like you said, France have had an uptick. They've got a lot of money in the domestic game. The only one that I think is, again, I'm English, so I'm a little disappointed that we're down there in 6th, but it's about where we are right now. We're redeveloping our team, and we've got a new coach, and that could look very different in a year's time.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised England is below Ireland, because Ireland sometimes is better than England, but I am very surprised they're below Argentina and France. I didn't think I'd ever see that.
Yeah, it's pretty close. You look at Argentina and England. That's maybe a couple of wins, and it's England move above. But again, like you said, and you hit the nail on the head. That is typically the top 10. The only one that you throw in there is Wales. Wales are at a very low part of their, there's been a lot going on in Wales, and you expect them to be back in the top 10 soon. But, they're the only team that is surprisingly out of that.
Would you put Samoa in there somewhere? Maybe 10,
the
11?
Consistency, the consistency that the South Pacific Island teams play, they don't play regularly enough for their rankings to get pushed up too high, and that's a whole different conversation about representation of those smaller countries. Samoa are a very physical team that could beat several of those teams in the top 10 on their best day, but consistency and the lack of consistent games that they get to play, that's probably why they don't challenge those top teams.
Got it. And then on the women's side, England is number 1. So great job for English women. We got Canada's very good. New Zealand, of course, the All Blacks, France, Australia, Ireland. And then down there in 9th, you see the USA women, who are starting to come up a little bit. Like you said, they probably have the best chance of being relevant between men and women, the USA women, especially with their bronze medal in France.
That surprises me a little bit.
I would have thought that the US would have been a little bit higher, to be honest, because, again, we have a lot of great athletes in this country. And I expect them to start rising back towards the top of that. Probably the bronze that they got in France probably doesn't affect this, because I believe this is probably the 15s.
It is.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, I'd be curious to see where the women's team land in the the rankings for 7s, because typically that's where the USA are stronger.
Hmm. Now, the big tournament coming up for World Cup is in Australia in 27. Are you going to be there, Nick?
If I can find a way to get there, I'd love to be there.
Maybe we should put
Maybe.
a delegation together from Charlotte. All of us go together. That'd be fun.
I mean, I think it's an amazing event, you know, and I think it's a spectacle. If you get the chance to do it, then you should. And you know, obviously, 4 years after Australia, it should be in the US. So you know, we have no excuse to not go to those games.
You heard what Rob said about that South Africa game he went to. One of the best events he's ever gone to. So
Mhm.
these are the world's best 10 players right now. You got Dupont from France, number 1. Finn Russell, Scotland. Will Jordan, New Zealand. Steph Detroit from South
Yep.
Africa. Dan Sheehan.
Mhm.
Bundi Aki.
Yep.
Artie Sevilla. Eben Etzbeth, who's the
Evan
guy.
Etzebeth, yeah.
Yeah, he's pictured there to the right with the trophy. Vandermerva, and then Andre Pollard from South Africa. So I
Yep.
noticed a trend here where almost all the top guys are from the top 4 teams. But
Well, what's interesting on that though is when we were discussing, you know, international teams bringing in, you know, players from other countries.
Yeah.
You look at number 6 there. That's not a typical Irish name.
Mm-mm.
right,
It's not Bundy McCackey, you know, it's Bundy Aki, and you know, that's he's a Kiwi who moved to Ireland, and you know, Duan van der Merwe is actually South African who plays for Scotland.
Okay.
So again, you're starting to see a little bit of this sort of the nations kind of moving around, but
Is that allowed in World Rugby where you can just go play wherever you want, or do you have to have some family connection?
you have to have residency, so it's 5 years. So you have to live in the country for 5 years or have a grandfather. But what's kind of interesting about this slide is that you look at Anton Dupont, who's on the left there. I'm not sure of his exact height. I think he's about 5'8".
Mm-hmm.
And then Eben Etzebeth on the right there, he's about 6'8".
Right.
You know,
Yeah,
and
he's
the
a
difference,
monster.
yeah, and the difference in the shapes and the sizes of players. You know, it's kind of crazy. It is a sport that just about any body shape and body size can play.
What's amazing is Dupont plays on both the 7s and the 15s, and he was part of that 7s team that won the medal in Paris, and then of course Etzbeth won the last 2 trophies for World Cup. So on the 15 side,
yeah, and in my lifetime, I would say that Anton Dupont is probably the best player I've ever seen.
Really? Wow.
In all generations. Now there are other players who've impacted the sport more, but in terms of just pure technical ability, he's light years ahead of anybody else that I've ever seen. He does things very, very differently, and he's just such a very effective player. He's a joy to watch, to be fair.
Yeah, he is fantastic. I would have thought 5'8" was a little short for a rugby player, but I guess it depends on what position you play, right?
Yeah, he's a scrum half, so he can get away with it. Yeah,
right.
He's like the little, you know, the little Jack Russell Terrier who goes digging underneath the pile of bodies to get the ball out. So
he's a fantastic passer too, by the way.
Yeah.
So yeah. So here's the question to you, Nick. I put this together just for you, and that is, what can USA do to improve in college and national rugby to actually try to compete? And I put a couple ideas here. You know, create a second division in rugby with local clubs and have kind of a situation where clubs will move up or move down based on play. Get in with the K through 12 school systems is another one. Promote college rugby and create a March Madness type national tournament where you create a lot more excitement like we do in basketball. And then also kind of need to make it easy for new players to find a club and start playing. We need to lower some of the barriers of entry. So any other thoughts about what we can do in the U.S. to try to get in that top 10?
Yeah, and a lot of these are in the works. You know, there is a second division that's feeding into the MLR now. It's called the ARP. You know, and that system's in place. It's just going to take a little while to bed in. The promoting college rugby and creating a March Madness. They do have what's called the Collegiate Rugby Championship, which is a sevens tournament that happens in April. And Rugby XV is actually hosting on March 22nd in Rock Hill, South Carolina. We're hosting an automatic qualifying event for that tournament. So we have 8 teams in the Premier Division and 16 teams in the Open Division that are going to be playing playing for that chance to be in rugby's version of March Madness. But the one that I see there that is critical is number 2. Getting it in schools, getting it not necessarily full contact rugby, but flag rugby, tag rugby, rugby is rugby games, getting that into the K-12 system, because that's where we need to close the gap. That's where rugby in this country is lacking in the skill development. And it's not that the players don't have the ability to do that. They're just not given the same amount of time. People who grow up in rugby playing countries, they have 12 to 15 years of skill development before we start really dialing up the athleticism.
Right.
And in this country, you miss that.
Like Rob has 9-year-old twin boys, right? So if they wanted to go play in Raleigh right now, my assumption would be there probably is some youth club they could go join, correct?
There's 2.
Yep. Okay.
There's the Raleigh Rattlesnakes and the Raleigh Redhawks.
Okay.
And there are several of the programs in the area. Broughton have a team, and the youth in the Charlotte area is growing quite quickly, but there are other teams close to Raleigh. Clayton have a really good youth system over there. The Redhawks, like I said, they have so there's rugby around. It just might not be as mainstream as we like. I'd love to see. I don't know if you know that Major League Rugby just signed with ESPN. I think that's great for the game.
I did see that. Yep.
People outside of rugby aren't going to know what TRN is. And that's kind of key. Like, we want to get rugby in the main media so that they can,
Right.
Everyone has access to it.
I did notice NBC's showing a lot of rugby lately. They show club rugby, they show MLR, they show sevens, show a lot of sevens.
Yeah.
So it's on a lot more every single year. So that's really exciting to see.
And really, like we were talking about before, what appeals to young people? What's going to make them enjoy watching it? How can we be creative in our delivery of the game? Because everybody, Rob included, I don't know how many times I've heard the saying, "I wish I'd had rugby when I was a kid," or "I wish I'd found this sport sooner."
Right.
Like, everybody says it. And so once you find the sport, you fall in love with the sport, but we've got to help people find that sport. And social media is a great way to do it these days. So, what is going to put us in front of the most people so that we can really show off and showcase what kind of sport we are?
All right. Well, we're going to append to this episode a little later in the description down below some of the rugby highlights we want you guys to see. And Nick, I put your business card in here with your email address, your number. Any other ways that people can find you?
Yeah, social media. Instagram is our main way of communication. Instagram is the handle is at the.rugbyxv.
Okay.
And we have a website, which is rugbyxv.org.
Well, Nick, final thoughts for the rugby-loving public, and really appreciate your time tonight. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, it's been great chatting to you guys. And again, I think, like I said, when people find the sport, they love the sport. The people are great. What Rugby XV is about, we're trying to create not just an environment for the players, but when we look at it, we want it to be a community, and we want, people, not just the players, but the families to really get to the core of what rugby is, it's a different sport. It's a brethren. It is a community like I've never seen. Soccer is more popular, but there isn't this you know, you see a stranger in the airport wearing a rugby shirt, and as a rugby person, it is your duty to go over and say, hey, you know, nice Wallaby shirt, or, you know, it's a community and it brings people together. And in this day and age, I think that's super important. And any way you can help boost rugby, then that's a great thing for me.
Well, Nick, we can't thank you enough for bringing rugby to the Sports Guys. We really appreciate your time tonight, and we really look forward to kind of watching your career as it progresses, your Rugby XV, and let us know if there's anything we can do to support as well in youth rugby and generating more rugby interest in the USA.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
Nick, it was great talking to you.
Guys, like this video and subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment to Nick down below about rugby and what you liked about the episode. And have a great evening. We'll see you next time.